So, good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear members of the audience. Welcome to our debate on the green reindustrialization of the European Union. The European Institute of Romania is delighted to facilitate this debate today for addressing the pressing issue of EU's long-term competitiveness. We have been inspired to put forward this theme by the recent developments at the EU level. And for start, I would like to point out a couple of things just to outline a framework for our discussion. Firstly, back in September this year, the President of the European Commission mentioned in her annual State of the Union a series of key topics related to reindustrialization and competitiveness, namely investments in the industry, regulations, dialogues with sectorial stakeholders regarding the green transition, industry's strategic autonomy, emerging technologies, supply chains, and the need to ensure a level playing field. Secondly, the Granada Declaration from October, also this year, marked the start of the process to define the Union's general political orientations and priorities for the next legislative cycle. In this sense, the European leaders gathered in Spain highlighted the need to work on our global long-term competitiveness while putting an emphasis on energy and resource efficiency, circularity, resilience to natural disasters, and adaptation to climate change. To address these high priority topics on the European agenda, we have developed, together with the Embassy of Romania to the Kingdom of Spain, a theme-based event. Adding to the online series European News in the Spotlight, this debate has the objective of informing the public about the importance that the Council of the European Union has in coordinating the policies of the member states in specific areas and bringing into debate priorities on the agenda of the current presidency. The Spanish presidency of the Council of the EU seeks to advance 4 priorities for its semester, and the first one is related to the reindustrialization of Europe and to ensuring its open strategic autonomy. Together with our invited speakers, we are going to tackle this subject today and see which are the challenges and the opportunities faced by the European Union in this sense. Now, the European business sector is worried to have fallen behind the US and China in terms of attracting investors and being on a competitive edge. The EU's capacity to increase the prosperity of its citizens on a medium to long-term range is being questioned in the context of dealing with driving forces such as climate change and digital transformation. So the question is, will the European Union remain competitive while pursuing its goals on green reindustrialization? Without further extending the introductory comments, I would like to thank the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Romanian Embassy in Spain for supporting us in organizing this event. And allow me to give the floor to His Excellency George Gabriel Bologan, Ambassador of Romania in the Kingdom of Spain. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Just a second. Thank you. Ladies, just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, distinguished audience, good morning. Thank you for this introduction and for offering me the kickoff. It is a pleasure for me to join you today, and I'm happy to see online our Director General, Aniela Crețu, as well as Director General from the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Alejandro Abean. Muchas gracias, Alejandro, por tu amistad y por tu apoyo. It's rewarding to have 2 friends by your side because friendship helps communication and strengthen the human relationship. That is the key to long-term success. Thank you for your time and interest. When the European Institute of Romania first contacted us for organizing this debate, I appreciated right from the beginning the initiative of bringing together institutions, think tanks, academics, and civil society to discuss important topics such as the reindustrialization of the European Union and enhancing its competitiveness. Thank you for the invitations, Mrs. Director General Juana Mocanu. I believe that given the challenging times we are going through, it is even more important that the European Union keeps the pace with the fast geopolitical and economic changes our world is facing. My message here today will be very concise and clear. In order to have a strong European Union, we need a strong economy. The European Union has proven great capacities of action, but we need to do more to prepare for the future challenges. From my privileged standpoint as the Romanian ambassador in Spain, I had the chance to work closely with the Spanish presidency of the EU Council. Its priorities, reindustrialization, green transition, social and economic justice, and strengthening our unity are in line with our main concerns and needs, and Romania can be counted on as reliable partner. Despite challenging internal political situation, serious efforts have been put into reaching important results during this semester. Beyond the organization of 3 summits, EU CELAC, the European Political Community, and the informal European Council in Granada, the Spanish presidency has made important progress, and I will mention only some of the key areas that include the reform of the energy market, the digital and green transition, the social agenda or migration, and asylum. Although important challenges still lay ahead of us, I believe we have to be particularly thankful to the Spanish presidency for bringing forward the importance of green, digital, and social transitions in order to be better prepared for the future. The European Union needs a friendly business environment and concrete measures to increase private investments in the so-called future industries. In this sense, Spain offers great examples, and I would like to mention the significant contribution of the Spanish government, and in particular of the first Vice President and Minister for Economy and Digitalization, Nadia Calviño, in order to enhance the capacity of producing semiconductors and microchips, or to support the deep bureaucratization. If we manage to always be a step ahead and anticipate the coming senses, digitalization offers important tools to improve our democracies and economies. To conclude, I thank you once again for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing the other official interventions. I wish you all a fruitful debate, which I'm sure will contribute to an in-depth reflection on the future of the euro economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your introductory comments. Thank you for telling us about the need for a strong economy and the need for a friendly business environment, and also for telling us the priorities of the Spanish presidency and the outcomes. We hope we will continue our cooperation and organize future joint events on topics of interest. Thank you very much. Let's go next to on the agenda. Unfortunately, Mrs. Daniela Gutman, Secretary of State for European Affairs, is no longer able to participate due to last-minute changes in her agenda. But we are happy to welcome Mrs. Aniela Crețu, Director General of European Union Department in the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mrs. Crețu, thank you for being with us today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Juana, and to thank you for organizing this debate, which is timely and important, as well as for your overall activity in trying to raising awareness on EU topics of major interest on the European agenda currently, and on the decision making process at EU level. It is one of the I think one of the major initiatives that brings added value to our overall effort to have a pro-European and proactive stance of Romania at European level. I would like to start by expressing myself the apologies on behalf of Secretary of State Daniela Gutman, not being able to attend this debate due to last moment commitments, as Oana mentioned. It is an honor for me to speak instead, and to share with you some thoughts and ideas with respect to this topic that we think it is very important in the current European context. Glad as well to see the representatives of the Spanish presidency with us today, and to salute Alejandro Avelan. It is very important and their presence is very important, as the Spanish presidency is currently investing a lot of energy in advancing the negotiations at EU level on the European files related to reindustrialization of the EU in the context of the larger decarbonization agenda. It is also a pleasure to see my colleagues in the ministry and in the Chancellery of the Prime Minister. Let me start by pointing out some elements of the EU context that we think are very relevant for the discussions on the topic today, related to reindustrialization. First, through the Green Deal, which was proposed back in December 2019 by the European Commission, EU has started shifting towards a more sustainable way of life, towards a decarbonized economy, and this entails already a complex, a multi-sectoral transformative process. We are already witnessing this transformative process, especially with the intermediate targets related to 2030. In just few years, so the policy framework of the EU has tremendously changed. And our ambitious climate agenda has made Europe a world pioneer in decarbonization. Just to give some examples, Europe has the largest share of solar and wind power currently in its electricity supply, has the greatest number of electric cars relative to its population. It's a world leader in the deployment of heat pumps and so on. The changes started to appear on several economic sectors, so we do have a dramatic change, a transformative process at the multi-sectoral level. EU is not assuming these objectives only internally, but is also projecting these ambitions at international level. And we are witnessing that more and more international actors join the fight against climate change and design their long-term economic strategies for achieving these sustainable growth objectives. With the COVID crisis in 2020, EU had to overpass a new set of challenges, which led to an activation of the discussions over building EU internal and external resilience. The current developments related to the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine are bringing additional challenges to the current picture. But in the current context, we think that the discussions are building actually on the discussions on a sustainable future are building on a more complex set of factors than before. We are encompassing basically two dimensions. One is related to the green objectives that I mentioned earlier, and we are currently adapting our legislative framework at European level through the Fit for 55 package and the subsequent proposals on transport, energy, financing, so on. And the second one, again very important, is the need to ensure access to resources. We understand currently that natural resources are much needed in our efforts to reach sustainability, essential for greening our economies, and they are at the same time limited or sometimes inaccessible, creating vulnerabilities for the EU and a certain level of unpredictability. And from this point, we are currently speaking about the geopolitics of critical raw materials and the need for open strategic autonomy that was mentioned in the initial presentation of this debate. Here I want to praise the work of the Spanish presidency, which invested a lot of energy in fostering and organizing debates on this concept of open strategic autonomy. Its work resulted in a very useful report that encompassed the comments and contributions of all member states, and which identified a set of vulnerabilities on several key areas for our economies, including energy, food security, digital technologies, and health, or all of them very important areas for this overall effort of reindustrialization and competitiveness. So resilience and building competitiveness are key concepts in our view in the current context and for the years to come, as they are also reflected in the Granada Declaration. We all know that the summit in Granada represented the kick-off of the reflection on the future strategic agenda of the EU for the upcoming years. And few principles included in the Granada Declaration are relevant for placing our discussions today into the right context, and they reflect actually the actions that will need to be taken forward. First of all, the need for a strong, competitive, and dynamic Europe, at the same time cohesive Europe in a changing world. Then the work for resilience and global competitiveness that I mentioned earlier, the need for addressing vulnerabilities and strengthen level of preparedness for future potential crises, the increasing of the level of anticipation of potential challenges and seize the opportunities related to green transition and the digital transition, in order to ensure the sustainability of our economic model and, what is very important, leaving no one behind. There are all relevant principles in our view to our discussions, showcasing the complexity of the work that needs to be done at European level. Definitely, the climate objectives and the initiatives related to resilience and competitiveness are here to stay in the years to come. And from this point of view, we expect a certain continuity to be ensured in the work that will be done at European level for reaching the already assumed objectives related to 2050 time framework. Building on this general consideration, allow me just to make some specific comments on three issues. Firstly, that we think that the single market is a very important prerequisite for the sustainability of our demarches related to reindustrialization. Let's not forget that the EU benefits from the largest and the most open market in the world. Second, we do have at European level, and the Commission presented in February this year, the Green Deal Industrial Plan, with 4 pillars, which is very important because it is a basis actually for building this long-term competitiveness and reindustrialization, building a sustainable industry at European level. Then, of course, the work done on the regulatory framework that was also mentioned before. The Critical Raw Materials Act, a very important piece of legislation that is currently advancing in negotiations at council level, and which will also bring its added value to this resilience, overall resilience objective. Of course, the issue of funding, which is very important, and we are witnessing discussions on how to sustain financially our innovation and other industrial ambitions, also in the context of the multi-annual financial framework review. And last but not least, the issue of skills. We do need, and a prosperous net zero industry cannot be built without proper skills. And here, the Pact for Skills, as part of the Green Deal Industrial Plan, is, in our view, a very important piece of instrument that will allow us, through professional reconversions, through extended trainings, through green jobs, creating green jobs, and through education, finally, sustain the overall ambition related to reindustrialization. One last comment on where is Romania placed in this debate from a European point of view, because I'm sure that the other speakers will tackle the internal dimension of the discussion. We do support resilience. We think that competitiveness and resilience go hand in hand, and that this balance between internal and external dimension of resilience is very important. Then Romania thinks that it is very important to create a level playing field within EU, and we are very satisfied that this principle is reflected in Granada Declaration. And at the same time, that it is very important for the added value that every member state could bring in the creation of the value chains and in this overall effort of reindustrialization to be exploited. Last but not least, convergence remains key. And we think that cohesion financing is representing a useful basis for building this stronger and more sustainable EU. And of course, the issue of skills that I already mentioned. We do need investment in skills for innovation and for allowing for our society at the end of the day to keep up the path with the new ambitions related to reindustrialization in a sustainable manner. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Aniela. Thank you for your insightful comments on the changes and developments of the climate agenda, on the accomplishments so far of the Spanish presidency in the field, and for pointing out the key issues of resilience and building competitiveness, and also on Romania's position on these important topics. Thank you for being with us today. And now let me give the floor to Mrs. Alina Jalea, State Advisor for Climate Change and Energy Transition, Chancellery of the Prime Minister, Government of Romania. Mrs. Jalea, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's all clear. You hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would like to make the transition now from the European Union framework and level to which my previous interlocutors took us, and then to try to go further to the implementation part in Romania, so in a more national context. I would like to talk to you today about our work that we try to do of coordination from the level of the Chancellery of the Prime Minister in trying to exactly keep up to the two main points that that my colleague Aniela Crețu pointed before, which is resilience and competitiveness. In Romania, both the Romanian government and the economic sectors are very aware of the fact that in the last years, there have been developed new paradigms for economic growth and competitiveness in the broader context of the green transition. And the level of awareness among economic operators in Romania regarding this structural paradigm is significant. It is no secret that their access to funding is increasingly conditioned by sustainability criteria and other criteria that relate to their capacity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and do no significant harm principle. In Romania, in April this year, the Romanian government committed to the objective of climate neutrality at country level. And in order to achieve such an ambitious goal, we launched the partnerships for energy transitions between the government and the economic sectors in Romania. Therefore, actually, even before April, in February, we started these partnerships, so a structured dialogue between the government and the economic sector, which is the primary partner of the Romanian government in fulfilling commitments both at national and European level. In February, we started with the oil and gas sector because we wanted to tackle the methane issue, and we created a working group or a task force under the aegis of the Interministerial Committee for Climate Change. Actually, all the work that we do on climate change and energy transition at the Chancellery of the Prime Minister develops under this Interministerial Committee for Climate Change. It is a 1.5-year old committee, which makes sure that we develop this esprit de corps in the government, within the government, on tackling climate change issues, because we are very aware that this is a multi-sectorial task, and there is not one single ministry that can achieve it in a silo approach. And this Interministerial Committee for Climate Change hosts these partnerships between the government and the economic sectors, and it has been growing in several task forces or working groups. As I mentioned, we started with one on reducing methane emissions, and it is in this working group where we try to prepare for the upcoming EU regulation on reducing methane emissions in the energy sector. All these working groups work on the same pattern. It is always government representatives, so we bring all the ministries and the agencies, authorities, which have a say on a particular issue. And it is always in a dialogue with confederations, employer confederations, and direct companies in different sectors. So we started with the oil and gas in February, and then throughout the year, we continued into separate working groups with the industry. And now we are also developing a partnership within the transport sector. With the industry, we preferred to work in separate formats and of dialogue, and we started with the producers of steel, lime, cement, paper, corrugated board, and glass. And more recently, in the last months, we initiated a partnership for energy transition with the industry sectors which are hard to abate, so the ones which are interested in carbon capture, storage, and utilization. All these partnerships are part of the National Resilience and Recovery Plan. So we took it very seriously, and we aim to put pressure on us, and at the end of each year to report on our work. And as we have established for ourselves in the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, we aim to end these partnerships with concrete plans for energy transition. Of course, we have the national plan for integrated plan for energy and climate. We have the National Resilience and Recovery Plan. We have the long-term strategy for Romania for reducing energy greenhouse gas emissions. But apart from these ones, or under their bigger umbrella, we aim together with the industry in Romania and then the transport sector to shake hands, let's say, and write two plans for energy transition. And the one with the industry, we aim to transform it into a Green Deal industrial plan for Romania, where we would like to have to reshape our vision for the industry of Romania, and to do a mapping exercise in this green context, and to prioritize the main sectors for us, all again towards the same objective of creating a more resilient and competitive broader economic sector for Romania. It is also under these partnerships that we did a lot of consultations among governmental stakeholders, mainly on green financing, because we are aware, and we keep telling the industry and other economic sectors that there are unprecedented amounts of funds available, but we realized that it is important to try to go more into detail and to support the industry into this process of accessing the funds, like and also European funds, like the Modernization Fund and the Just Transition Fund, which in Romania are the main European funds which are available for the industry. In the next year, we very much hope to mobilize ourselves and to increase our capacity to develop the partnerships further to other economic sectors, to the agriculture, to the heating and cooling sectors, and beyond. I would like to stop here for the sake of the time, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Jalea, for your specific comments on Romania's framework and commitments in the field, for telling us about the partnerships for energy transition, the restructured dialogue between the government and the economic sector, the Interministerial Committee for Climate Change and its tasks. It is important that you brought into discussion the details on Romania's commitments and actions in the specific field. So thank you for joining us today. Now, let me invite Mr. Alejandro Avelian Garcia de Diego, Director General of Coordination of the Internal Market and Other Community Policies, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation in Spain, to take the floor. Your Excellency, welcome to our debate. You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you very much to the European Institute of Romania for inviting me. I feel very honored to join the very distinguished list of speakers and participants in this seminar, which is very timely. I will take the floor as General Director of the country which has the rotating presidency of the Council, which takes place at a very special moment. We feel that since this second semester of 2023 is the last fully operational presidency council period, since the European Parliament elections will take place in June, we feel that we have a special responsibility in moving forward the European agenda, especially in the legislative files. I think the presidency takes place in a very important moment, in the sense that we have gone through, the European Union, the world itself has gone through two subsequent crises: the COVID-19 crisis, and afterwards the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and the consequences that has had in the energy sector, but through the energy sector in the inflation and the competitiveness of European companies within the internal market and in global markets. And it also takes place not only because of the two subsequent crises, also because of the very important agendas that have been fixed at European level. The first one, of course, is the European Green Deal, which has an environmental perspective. It was approved as a green plan from an environmental and climate change perspective. But I think it's very clear, and nobody would discuss, that it also has very important implications. For example, when it was already mentioned by the State Secretary, the 4 strands of the Green Deal. First one being the simplified regulatory environment, which includes some very important proposals from the point of view on the industry. For example, the net zero industry, which is a legislative proposal intended to scaling up the manufacturing capacities of the European industry for those technology with net zero emissions, in which Europe is supposed to have an edge in terms of competitiveness with other companies around the world. So net zero industry, although net zero is part of the Green Deal, but it's pretty obvious it's also part of the EU Industrial Green Plan. And the same goes with the critical raw materials. We saw with both crises, with the COVID-19 and the disruption of the supply chains, and afterwards with the war in Ukraine, we also saw the disruption and the difficulties in the supply of energy, how the European Union needed to be more resilient and to have a more variety in terms of the supply of critical raw materials, which are absolutely crucial for being successful in both transitions, the green and also the digital transitions. Both transitions require of critical raw materials, nickel, cobalt, tungsten, rare earths, without which we won't be able to have to reach the climate goals of 55 emissions reductions as compared to 1990 by 2030, and the climate neutrality by 2050. So we need this Critical Raw Materials Act. It's something under which the Spanish presidency is working. We already had a general approach within the Council under the Swedish presidency, and we are hoping that we will have a deal with the European Parliament still during the current semester under the Spanish presidency. And we are also hoping to have an important progress with the net zero industry. Our provision is that we will have the general approach within the Council of the Net Zero Industry Act in the Competitiveness Council, which will take place in Brussels on December 7th. And then we have the electricity market. I think those are the main elements in terms of legislation under this chapter of simplified regulation of the Green Industrial Plan, of the Green Deal in general, which is the electricity market. We are very happy and very proud that we obtained the general approach. It was a very difficult approach because, as you all know, there were very different positions within the Council as regards the contract for differences and how the financing mechanisms it could have for the different kind of generation technologies of energy generation technologies. And we were very happy, and we all collectively had a big success within the Council, and we reached a general approach on this electricity market design and directive, which is crucial in terms of preventing volatility and also providing access to the lower price of renewables European consumers, being it families or citizens or the industry itself. So we have these three pieces of legislation. Net zero, we will have, as I said, we hope we'll have the general approach by December. Critical raw materials, hopefully we will close a deal with the European Parliament also in the coming weeks. And the electricity market design, we have already had the agreement within the Council. We are hoping to launch we have already started the discussions with the European Parliament, and I think those are very, very important milestones in the progress of the working agenda of the Council and of the European Union as such. And then we have all the second chapter, which is the funding. Of course, there are unprecedented amounts of financing available through the Next Generation. Let's remember that the Next Generation is a package which came out of the crisis created by the COVID-19 crisis. It was not the Next Generation was previous to the war in Ukraine and to the industrial plan, but nonetheless, it's the objectives and the sectors which are eligible to receive the financing are those related to the green transition and to the digital transition. And together with that, then it was these Next Generation funds were complemented with REPowerEU, and also with something which is very important from the point of view of the functioning of the internal market, which is the competition policy and the flexibility introduced through the temporary framework for crisis and transition, and the amendments to the block exemption regulations, and also a discussion which is still ongoing with the proposals under the multi-annual financial framework, and how we're going to be able to preserve the level playing field within the European Union, and at the same time being able to provide financing and support for companies which are working in these sectors of the green transition and of the digital transition, especially as compared to other jurisdictions, the US after the Inflation Reduction Act, or the support of the Chinese authorities to their companies in China. Thirdly, we have this skills aspect, which is crucial if we are going to be successful in the green and digital transitions, and in the new industry adapted to this new green economy and sustainable economy. It's very clear that there will be a very important market for employment in these fields, which needs to be supported by the public authorities, but also by the private sector, and there we need to coordinate efforts and to have a public-private partnerships in order to provide and to foster and to scale up the training of people being able to work in these sectors. Finally, trade. Trade is something which is related not to the internal market itself, but to the external dimension of the internal market. It's related to the Critical Raw Materials Act that I referred previously, and this is something which is very much related also to the topic which was discussed by the leaders of the European Union in Grenade, and the declaration which was issued in Grenade. It is very clear that we need to secure the sustainable supply of critical raw materials, of energy, and at the same time we have to preserve an open the main principles of the functioning of the internal market and of an open economy. And I think that's where the political debate is in today. How do we keep our open economies? How do we secure the availability of supply of these critical elements, be it in the health sector, be it in the energy sector, or be it critical raw materials for the industry? We hope that we will be reaching the right balance, and that we will do this. This is our view as presidency. We'll have to do it not only by closing Europe to the rest of the economies in the world, but not being independent sovereignty doesn't mean independence. It means perhaps to share dependencies and to have interdependencies so that we are more resilient, because we have less dependencies from one single country or one single group of countries, that we create these interdependencies, and that we also put value and show the value of the very important single market that we have. So this is a general presentation. I have to say that apart from the Green Industrial Plan and the 3 legislative proposals, which are perhaps the most important ones, it's very clear that the Fit for 55 package, which is already very much underway and being in the phase of, I think the legislative phase is almost over for all of the 13 proposals presented by the Commission in July 21. But I think it's very clear that if we go through the list of the 13 proposals, that we see that they all have a very important industrial impact. Let's say, for example, the European trading schemes, or let's say the burden sharing regulation for all those sectors which are not covered by the allowances system, or for example the carbon border adjustment mechanism, also very important in terms of trying to prevent the carbon leakage of European companies to third jurisdictions, or for example all the transportation measures as regards for example maritime transport through the refuel maritime, or the promotion of sustainable aviation fuels in the refuel aviation. So I think we have the Green Deal, and we have, we have the Industrial Green Plan, but then we have the Green Deal itself with the Fit for 55, which is also very important because all those measures have a very important impact in the functioning and of the European industry. Let me just conclude that it's our view that if we want to be successful in both the green transition and the digital transition, we need a very strong European industry. We won't be able to be successful if we don't have a strong European industry, because the industry is the one which provides innovation, the one which provides technology, the one which provides the tools to be successful in all those in both transitions. So we very much applaud, and we are very much working in favor of having a strong and supported European industry being able to compete in global markets and to create the necessary conditions for the success in both transitions and in the future and prosperity of the European economy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your comments on the Spanish Council Presidency's achievements, on the importance for the general approach, the Critical Raw Materials Act, the electricity market, on the industrial plan, on the Green Deal in general. Also, thank you for the remarks on the funding available and still necessary for the trade and its role in the single market, for securing a sustainable supply of raw materials and developing an open economy, and also for the need to have a very strong European industry. We are very grateful for your presence here and contribution to our debate. Thank you very much for being with us today. I would like to thank the speakers for their contributions so far. It was a very interesting and timely framework for the next panel's discussion. Let me give the floor to my colleague, Eliza Vash, Head of European Studies Unit, in order to introduce our panel speakers and moderate the discussions. Eliza, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the presentations that have been offered so far. I take the remark that has been shared by the last speaker that open strategic autonomy does not mean to become independent, but rather to share dependencies and to start this panel debate. We are going to have 4 presentations, 4 interventions for this panel debate, and the second part of it is going to be dedicated to opening the questions that are addressed by you, the participants in the audience. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing the interest on the green reindustrialization of the European Union and the interest for competitiveness. The first presentation is going to be given by Mrs. Madalina Ivanica, Deputy Head of Unit, Energy Intensive Industries, Raw Materials, Hydrogen, DG GROW, European Commission. She has previously worked in the Directorate General for Environment as coordinator for enlargement and as coordinator for interinstitutional affairs. Earlier in her career, Mrs. Ivanica served as advisor to the Romanian chief negotiator for accession to the European Union. In addition to this, she was director of studies and an associate professor in European studies at the Maastricht University. She has published on the economic and social impact on the accession process to the European Union. And today, we have the occasion, for which we are very thankful, to listen to her presentation about the secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials for the EU. Mrs. Ivanica, you have the floor, please. Can you hear us? I think we have a bit of an internet connection issue.
I think she is not in, Elisa. I tried to contact her. Please move on.
Well, in this case, we are going to switch to the next presentation, which is going to be given by Mr. Carlos Puente Martin, who has a PhD in economics. He's a lawyer and a political scientist, political and economic analyst, and a member of Team Europe, European Commission. Given his extensive work both in the private sector, but also in different national public authorities, Mr. Carlos Puente will talk today about the reindustrialization of Europe to support the green transition and the role of the European Union. And for this, the main speaking points are going to be related to the Green Deal Industrial Plan and the Net Zero Industry Act. Mr. Puente, you have the floor, please. If you can switch on your microphone.
Yeah, it's okay now?
Excellent, thank you.
So thank you very much for your kind presentation. And I will start with my first slide of my presentation with the introduction. Well, this is the last one, so we have to start with the beginning, and that's it. So this is the beginning of the cover of my presentation. As you said, in fact, has a subtitle, which is the role of the Europe Union. Well, the Granada Declaration, as usually all declarations, are a very general statement, but it underlines some very important topics for the economic situation of the European Union, not only for this century, but also for the coming years afterwards. Well, if the title of this is the reindustrialization, means that we are disindustrialized. So that means that we have suffering a disindustrialization process. And we really suffer from that in the very recent past. We have to remember about the microchips crisis and also about the COVID. Well, I don't know if you are very familiar with the number of plants of microchips in European Union, but for instance, only Germany and Netherlands has plants to produce this kind of very sophisticated semiconductors. Well, United Kingdom had 12 plants, but is not longer a member of the European Union. So this is very important to understand that the present situation has nothing to do with political situation that we are also suffering currently, but it's because a wrong policy in the past. We import everything during the COVID tragedy from Asia country, and also microchips are also imported from Asia. Most microchips come from Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and China. So this is one of the important topics. The transition to a green reindustrialization means that we have to fight and to realize where are our weak points in our area in the European Union. And for this end, we have to apply some logical and very important topics in economy. Well, the Declaration of Granada don't talk about the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is really the driving force. Without the entrepreneur, it's not possible to produce and to be in the position that the European Union might be, because it's a very important group of countries. So we have to be at the same level as the United States and China in several aspects. And we have to point out something very important that everyone can check it if you take a train from Vienna to Budapest and realize that, well, it lasts almost 3 hours, and the roads, the freeways between Budapest and Vienna, Budapest, Bratislava, and the other capitals, wow, is quite busy. It's thousands of trucks. It affects the environment. So this is one of the main important things we have to do, is to transform and to make electricity cheaper and also transportation fees cheaper, to develop a green economy in the future. And so we have to change this kind of intensive consumption transport into a different one. And one question which is important, sometimes some politicians said, well, we think on citizens and we think on the welfare of people. But, well, I have the impression that sometimes we left behind the expert opinion and also the citizen. So next is what is the role? What's the European Union is doing? Well, we have the Green Deal Industrial Plan. Please, next slide. So the European Commission in February 2023 has adopted the Green Deal Industrial Plan just to enhance the competitiveness of Europe's zero industry and support a fast transition to climate neutrality. And this plan is based on 4 pillars. First, a predictable and simplified regulatory. That means, in fact, to provide the right information, but also tackle with something very, very new, is a Critical Raw Material Act. And later on, I will talk about it. The second pillar is an accelerated access to financing. This is a key topic, because it's important to deal with European capital markets, but also with a cooperation, public-private financing. The third one is to enhance skills. That means that the European Union is not really ready to deal with this kind of technologies. And the Commission proposed a net zero industry academies. But I didn't see how it will be implemented. So that means that these academies will belong to the present educational system, and there will be a cooperation between the states, the member state government, and the commission. Well, it's not very clear, and maybe some of my colleagues we can make some clarification about it. And the fourth pillar is the open trade for resilient supply chains, which has been mentioned recently with the person who was talking before me. Well, it's necessary to make, according to let's say the talk of this Green Deal industrial plan, an open a critical material claim. Well, I recently read an article from Chile. As you know, the European Union is negotiating with Chile a new agreement. And just recently, it was in October 24, El Clarín, which is one of the most important newspapers, said that the European Union want to make Latin American countries a new colonialism. We have to avoid this. We have to avoid this. In my opinion, what we have to do is to include in future agreements with third countries, we should include a fair green clause. So to this end, it will be very interesting to cooperate with third countries in Africa and Latin America, so to avoid this kind of problems. And the Net Zero Industrial Act was proposed in March this year, and is really to encourage manufacturing clean technologies for clean energy transition. Well, there is a long list of solar, photovoltaic, and thermal, of onshore wind, and so many different. But in my opinion, there is a lack of information about the cost-benefit analysis, because it's necessary to take into consideration the opinion of the scientists. But this plan is based on 6 pillars. First, improving the condition for investment. It's very important for the industrialization to have easy access to for investment. The second is to accelerate the capture of CO2. Well, there is as you know, there is an important discussion with the intellectual and with the scientists, because CO2 is one of the most frequent gas existing in the nature, and is necessary even for vegetables and plants and other things, and to facilitate the asset to market. This is also very critical point, because in the energy market, there is an oligopoly, and the industrialization need low cost of raw material, energy, and transport. So the energy is very important to deliver energy at very competitive prices. And enhancing skill, the next zero industry academies that I already mentioned. And so it's necessary to clarify what is really the role of the European Commission. And finally, the Net Zero Europe platform for financial needs. In my opinion, it's necessary not only the state financial supply, but also in cooperation with the private one. And also industrial sector is very important for innovation. So we have to facilitate to the industry to make easily improvements in new technologies. And this is really what we have to do. So finally, my conclusions was that it's necessary an urgent restructuration of road, river, and canal transport infrastructure, the present. So it's necessary to make an audit of what we have, to know what we have to do in the future. The transition must encourage clean energy to reduce cost in the industrial sector, and government must simplify administrative procedure and pay more attention to small and medium enterprises. More cooperation, government, private sector is the key stone. So for the innovation and financing projects. To modify some wrong policies, as we did in the past concerning the microcities, we cannot delegate the production of important and very sophisticated products in third countries. I talk about the microchips and also about the problem we suffered during the COVID tragedy. Also crisis, but it was really a tragedy. And it's necessary, so a new house is necessary a national, regional, and local authority to pay more attention to citizens and experts. So this is really important, in my opinion, to develop and to succeed with the plan that is already scheduled in the Granada Declaration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Puente, for your critical introduction on the two plans introduced by the European Commission. And now, if we have reconnected with Mrs. Ivonica, can you give us a sign if you're online? There were some troubles on the internet connection. But we are very much focused on getting everyone back and continuing with the debate as we have planned to do so. Mrs. Ivonica, can you hear us?
No, it's nothing.
Okay, so we will try to reconnect after the following presentation. All right, so we had I think she's connecting right now. So I will kindly ask you for your patience to see if we can reconnect with Mrs. Ivonica. I think she is back in the event. Mrs. Ivonica, can you hear us? I'm afraid not. All right then. So from a critical presentation related to the Green Deal Industrial Plan and the Net Zero Industry Act, I would like to invite you to move forward to Mrs. Eugenia Gushilov, who is the director of the Romania Energy Center, and to ask her to talk about the EU's industrial policy. It's important to note in this presentation her past activities in this field. She worked with NATO, with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the World Bank, the European Commission, and with the Romanian government, together with other companies, universities, and NGOs. Her key expertise lies in energy transition, in renewable energy sources, hydrogen, electricity, oil and gas, and alternative fuels. So I will invite Mrs. Gushilov to talk today about the latest changes in the regulations that have been mentioned so far. In a comparison that we have included for this debate between the EU and the US industrial policy, the industrial alliances fostered by the EU, and also a couple of sensitive fields and strategic dependencies that EU has. Mrs. Gushilov, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you, Elisa, for this wonderful introduction.
I would like not to repeat what my predecessors have said, because already some things have been said, important things about the industrial policy and the Net Zero Industry Act. So I would like maybe to focus on the why this is happening. And it's interesting because the EU came up with its industrial policy right before the pandemic was declared by the World Health Organization. Since then, many things have happened, and it was necessary to have this update, which came in the form of the Net Zero Industry Act in March of this year. What is this update about? It is about, and I will borrow here the words of our American friends, it's about owning, so ownership of our clean energy future. It's about manufacturing the things that we'll need to materialize and to implement the green energy transition. Because what we do not want to replace one dependency, the dependency on hydrocarbons that we had on Russia, and we all saw how that worked out and how it backfired last year. So we don't want to replace one dependency with another one, so a dependency on China for critical raw materials. And here the EU and the think tank of the European Commission has conducted a thorough analysis, also the European Parliament, and in mapping the dependencies and the strategic dependencies. And it did show that for the components, the 130 elements that were analyzed, the EU was overly dependent on China, about 52% dependency on some very critical, important elements for the energy transition, but also for sensitive sectors like the defense, aerospace one, and others. So we want, and it's interesting how the European Union came this year and reframed the question of its relationship with China in this context, because now the mantra and the motto is de-risk, not decouple. So we do not want to decouple from China in our economic interactions, but we do want to minimize the risks and not be overly dependent on China, because we learned that over-dependence can be weaponized. Any dependence can be weaponized. So we have this industrial policy of the European Union, so the Green Deal in a way, but also the Net Zero Industry Act of March this year. Very interesting, the Green Deal, and the predecessor already mentioned that it was designed as a response to the pandemic. So it has a short-term focus until 2026, while in the meantime, it has become, so this next generation facility, an accelerator for the twin transitions, so green and digital, which works with different timelines, so 2030, 2040, 2050. On the other hand, we have had this significant development in the United States, and in practically what we're seeing is the fact that the United States now has an industrial policy which, well, the most important act which points to that is, of course, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was adopted in August of last year, and which places America on a firm path to energy transition and commits America to net zero by 2050. So it's interesting. Why? Because the IRA has this long-term view. The Green Deal had the short-term view, but this Net Zero Industry Act comes and corrects this thing in the sense that, and I will not say about the principles, I will say just that it comes with two important targets, the Net Zero Industry Act. It says the European Union needs to be able to manufacture clean energy, net zero energy technologies that it will need for its energy transition in Europe. And it sets a target of minimum 40% capacity, manufacturing capacity. So we have to be able to produce what we will use for this energy transition. Then there is another important target which says, okay, we will need to be able to store about 50 million tons of CO2, so carbon capture and storage, annually in the European Union. It's very interesting because the net zero industry transition talks about net zero technologies, but they also say that there are, of these net zero technologies, there are strategic net zero technologies. And these are important. Why? Because these technologies will be prioritized, they will be fast-tracked, they will be granted permits faster, authorized faster.
what are these priority technologies? Solar PV, solar thermal, renewable technologies, both for onshore and for offshore, batteries and storage, heat pumps, geothermal, electrolyzers, or here hydrogen, fuel cells, CCUS, grids. It's interesting because in reverse or mirroring, you look at what the Americans prioritized in their industrial policy. And there is, of course, some overlap. There are some similarities. They also prioritize solar. They prioritize transformers and manufacturing in the United States of various grid components, heat pumps, but also insulation material in their case. You do not find this in the priority fields in the European industrial policy. Electrolyzers as well. So you see a lot of overlap. Hydrogen, but the Americans have advanced nuclear. Europe doesn't have advanced nuclear as a priority field. But again, storage, carbon capture, and utilization storage for on the American side. So there are some similarities, but the overlap is not total in the sense that there are fields that are of interest for the American industrial policy, and you do not find this, for instance, the advanced nuclear in the European industrial policy. Also, it's interesting how Europe and the US approached, in a way, in a different manner, the way the stimulus package for net zero and for helping us reach net zero, because the Americans, I mean, Europe as well as America use a mix of instruments, but the Americans focus more on credits and some fiscal holidays. So in a way, revenues not collected to the federal budget, while Europe, for instance, through its Next Generation facility, uses grants, loans, so borrowed money at a very advantageous interest rate, and then subsequently distributed this financing to the member states at very advantageous interest rates. So one pillar is this Net Zero Industry Act, and the other pillar of this new European renewed industrial policy is this Critical Raw Materials Act, which also other speakers have talked about. I will say just this about the Critical Raw Material Act. It comes up with voluntary targets for basing in Europe some stages of the extraction, processing, and then use of these components in the various assemblies. So these targets would be voluntary, so they would not be mandatory. Right now, we did not talk about mandatory targets. And we're talking about an extraction stage, so extracting critical raw materials in Europe that should reach 10% by 2030 of all the critical raw materials that we use from the 3% that we currently have. We are talking about a target of processing and refining that should reach 40% by 2030, and recycling based in Europe that should be at least 15%. Then what this Critical Raw Material Act comes up with this list. And this list is not its first iteration, it's its fifth iteration, because the European Union and the European Commission has been coming up with this list of critical raw materials, and it changes. And the elements on this list differ, and it's updated every 2 years. So now we have 34 elements on this list. Of course, the European Union does not detail what the rare earths are, light earths or heavy rare earths are. So if you detail which are, exactly the elements considered rare earths, then you get to a list of 51 elements. So it's interesting because, and here the European Commission has conducted a very important exercise in mapping out the sensitivities and the dependencies. And the result is that they outlined six strategic areas in which the EU is too dependent on overly dependent, and the dependency is very high on foreign parties or third countries. And well, these are the raw materials. That's why we are talking about these raw materials, because these are raw materials used for the green transition. And gallium, germanium, yttrium, all sorts of elements with names difficult to pronounce. But also we're talking about batteries. We are talking about the active pharmaceutical ingredients. And the previous speaker, Mr. Martin, said that in the pandemic, we did see how we were lacking. We no longer manufacture important active pharmaceutical ingredients that we need for our health sector. Then hydrogen, semiconductors, and cloud and edge technologies. So these are kind of the 6 strategic areas where we have a dependency that puts us at a disadvantage and that can be weaponized against Europe and the European member states at any time. Now, the European Union, apart from this industrial framework, industrial policy, is updating and came up with interesting and very ambitious numbers on sectorial strategies. So we have very ambitious targets in the solar field. For instance, the EU mobilized an solar industry alliance, modeled according to the batteries industry alliance that the European Union put together in 2019, in trying to establish this ecosystem so that we produce here in Europe at least a part of the things that we will need in this energy transition, because otherwise we will be creating jobs and contributing to the GDP of other countries. So in conclusion, or just to sum things up, I would say that there are very ambitious targets on the hydrogen front, because the hydrogen has to replace natural gas, and the EU has this unbelievable target in which it wants to halve its natural gas consumption, and it relies and use hydrogen as the instrument to replace natural gas. Then if you talk about solar, for instance, we had in 2020 136 gigawatts capacity. So the EU wants by 2025, so in 2 years' time, to have 320 gigawatts installed solar capacity. So to double this. So the targets that we are seeing and that the European Commission is working with are extremely ambitious. And it is paramount that part of the investments in this, let's say, new technologies, and new capacities, electrolyzer capacity, the targets for hydrogen were also upped significantly. So it's very important that we make the stuff or the equipment that we know for sure that we will require in the coming years, and it's very important for these things to be manufactured here in Europe. So in a way, we are in a race against the United States, but also other countries, to prop up and the Made in Europe brand. And I will stop here to leave room for question and answers, maybe in the last section. Elisa?
Thank you very much for the critical overview of the regulations brought into the discussion, and also to the comparison on what the US is doing versus the European Union. I think the internet connection that we had so far were actually helping us in order to point the two perspectives that have been shared by Mr. Puente and Mrs. Gushilov, and then to move towards what the work of the European Commission and the understanding that comes from this institution actually is. So hopefully, without any internet connection issues, we have the pleasure to invite Mrs. Modelina Ivanica to offer her presentation on how to build a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials for the European Union. And just to offer in brief a short description that I have mentioned before, Mrs. Ivanica is the Deputy Head of Unit Energy Intensive Industries, Raw Materials, Hydrogen, and DG GROW at the European Commission. Mrs. Ivanica, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Elisa, and I truly apologize to all of the participants for what happened. Doesn't happen often, but we need the digital transition to go ahead as fast as possible and as good as possible. I will now share my presentation. I hope you can see it. A lot of things have been said already by the previous speakers, and actually, as Elisa said, I think it comes at the right time that we had this delay, where I would like to present to you the European Critical Raw Materials Act that was adopted by the Commission in March this year. The general frame in which we work and why it was the need for such an act was already presented by the previous speaker, starting from the European Green Deal and the ambition that we have to transform our economy, the decarbonization goals, but also what happened over the last years in terms of crisis that we went through, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, the COVID crisis, that showed that this transition needs to happen faster than we initially envisaged. But this also proved that and shows that there is increased competition globally for the raw materials that are actually needed for the clean transition, for the clean technologies that will make the decarbonization of our economy happen. So we are facing an increased competition from the global players with an increased demand for raw materials that are already scarce. And in all this picture, the EU has strong dependencies, and the previous speakers have spoken about increasing resilience and the security of supply. So basically, this is what our act sets forward as its main objective, to ensure a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials for the European Union. And in order to do that, we built the act along four main pillars. First, we want to strengthen and to ramp up and to strengthen, to foster, to ramp up the EU domestic production of critical raw materials along the value chain. This is essential in order to reduce dependencies and to have our own strategic independence. Then we want to be able to better monitor and mitigate the risk of disruptions that can come from strong dependencies on sometimes single suppliers. So we are building within the Act a very strong monitoring and risk assessment and stress testing pillar that will give us the necessary data and information needed in case that situations are happening that could affect our industry. The third pillar looks at how to improve the circularity and sustainability of critical raw materials. And that's because we want to build a very strong secondary raw materials market in the EU. And here we come with a lot of actions and provisions that will improve the reuse, the recycling, the recovery, the recycling and reuse of critical raw materials. And although we are going to strengthen the domestic capacities along the value chain, we know that the EU will still rely on imports, and we will need critical raw materials from third countries. So the fourth pillar of the Act looks at how to actually deal internationally and on international in discussions with other partner countries, and how to build strategic partnerships on critical raw materials value chains. Eugenia already mentioned the benchmarks that we set forward and we put forward with the Act. Indeed, these are not legally binding targets, but benchmarks, as we call them, and they are valid for the entire EU, so not per member state. And we set this benchmark so that we are able to boost and strengthen the EU internal capacities from extraction, where we like to have at least 10% of our consumption extracted in the EU. We want to have at least 40% processing capacity in the EU for the strategic raw materials that we use. And we also want to have a strong recycling capacity that will cover at least 15% of our consumption. And when we look at the international pillar and international dimension, as I said, given the strong dependencies that we have, and in some cases on single suppliers, we want to reduce these risks. And we put forward a diversification benchmark, which says that not more than 65% of EU consumption of each strategic raw material should come from a single third country. Eugenia already mentioned what are the critical raw materials, and I would like actually to explain a little bit more in details, because the Act speaks about two types. We speak about critical raw materials and we speak about strategic raw materials. Critical raw materials is what Eugenia mentioned already before. It's what we assess in terms of the entire EU economy. So those non-energy, non-agriculture raw materials needed for the EU economy, where we look at their economic importance, as I said, for the entire economy, but also at the supply risks. And we've been identifying these critical raw materials since 2011. Every 3 years, we come up with a new criticality assessment. So this year, together with the Act, we put forward a new critical raw materials list that contains 34 materials. And you have them here actually in blue. So basically what we notice is that with every reiteration of the criticality assessment, we have increased the number of materials on the criticality list. A subset of the critical raw materials is what we call the strategic raw materials. And we identify this by looking at the materials that are key for strategic technologies. So those technologies that are needed for the green and digital transition, but also for this defense and space applications. And this because of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, which showed that we need to be strong in our defense and space application and industry. So the strategic raw materials are those materials key for these technologies that also will face an increased demand that will outstrip the supply. So here on this list, the strategic raw materials are those in green. And as I said, the Act focuses on these materials as essential for the green technologies. And basically, the Critical Raw Material Act stops at the moment where you so you extract, you process and refine this material, and then you have the Net Zero Industry Act, which takes these materials and basically takes them into industrial system to manufacture the clean technologies, and those were expressed a little bit earlier. So again, here is what we use to identify the strategic. We have 16 on the list so far, including, of course, the battery raw materials. Now, looking and coming back on how we are going to make sure that EU is stronger and more resilient, and we have our autonomy in this area that will allow us actually to proceed with our goals, with the carbonization of our economy, but also to be independent and resilient when it comes to different crises and the difficult situations and economic difficulties. The Act has a very strong focus on identification of strategic projects. So these are projects that are along the value chain from the extraction, processing to recycling that will help actually for the fulfillment of the benchmark that we put forward. So we put forward certain criteria that will be used to assess and to identify the strategic projects. And once you become a strategic project, you have two main benefits. The first one is a faster and streamlined permitting process. And here we put forward certain provisions that together with the member states will establish one-stop shops that the permits will be delivered within certain deadlines. For example, for the extraction projects, 24 months, and for processing and recycling projects within 12 months. But all this in full compliance with the environmental assessment and social legislation that exists in the EU. So the Act doesn't change the environmental nor the social acquis that exists already. On the contrary, it aims to better implement it, to make it faster and more easier and streamlined for the project promoters to actually make these projects come to life. So that's the first benefit. And the second it refers to the access to finance, and this is what we call the enabling conditions. Meaning that once a project is designated as strategic project, the Critical Raw Materials Board, which is comprises of member states and the Commission and the European Parliament as observer, will look at possibilities and different funds, programs, funding options for each project on case-by-case basis, because each project, depending on the value chain in which it is, has a different has different needs. And we actually aim for a strong blending mechanism in which we use the public funds and programs and funding sources together with private financial possibilities. We are also aiming to facilitate the conclusion of offtake agreements and to prepare a joint purchasing schemes. Now, coming to the second pillar, we have realized over the last years, with all the crises that we went through and export restrictions imposed by China on several materials already, starting with rare earth elements, magnesium in 2021, and even this year, two export restrictions that have been announced by China, one on gallium and germanium in August this year, and we're starting with 1st of December on graphite. We realized that we need to be better prepared and to have better data. So we plan to monitor better in order to avoid the supply risks. We plan to do stress tests by the Commission together with the member states, so that we analyze different scenarios. So in the sense of what if happens if our single supplier imposes export restrictions, so that we are also able to alert the member states in case of risk, and also the companies. We also want the companies themselves to be better prepared in case of risk of supply risks and disruptions. We have noticed in our discussions and assessments that we have done that actually the companies, they do not know their entire value chain. So they know very well, of course, their direct provider, but then what is going up the value chain is not really known. So, and this, of course, can have risks. So we would like the large companies to prepare audit reports that will be submitted to their board, in which they analyze the supply chain and identify the risks existing. When it comes to strategic stockpiling, that's we don't aim to create strategic stocks at the EU level, but we would like the member states to be able to share information and to coordinate in case of risk disruptions of supply, so that we can help each other if the suppliers are stopping the deliverables. And this came also from the past, where we learned and we saw that, for example, in the case of magnesium, China stopped completely the export of magnesium to our industry, and our basically companies and industry were not able to produce their products. So we need to make sure that to have a better understanding what strategic stocks and reserves exist in each member state, and then how to create a system in which the member states help each other. And as I said earlier, we also would like to create some form of voluntary joint purchasing scheme, similar to what is now in the gas platform. And here comes the third pillar, the one related to the environmental protection, the circularity and sustainability aspects. As I said, there is a lot of potential in the waste streams, and we identified this during the impact assessment. We identify a lot of potential from the extractive waste facilities, so the mining tailings, that need to be actually looked at, analyzed, and the raw materials identified and recovered. So we are asking the member states to develop national measures to improve the circularity, to increase the reuse, collection, and recycling, and to adopt and implement recycling technologies. We are starting from quite a low level of recovery and recycling of critical raw materials and strategic raw materials in the EU. That's why we think that our benchmark of at least 15% is quite ambitious. So just to give you an example, for example, for the rare earth elements, we are recycling only 1% currently in the EU. So to reach by 2030, 15% is already quite ambitious. But of course, there is this is a joint work that has to be done by the Commission together with the member states and with the companies, with the industry, with the economic sector, to make this happening. When it comes to the sustainable choices, we are suggesting and proposing in the Act the recognition of certification schemes that exist already internationally. We are not developing our own certification scheme, but we put forward certain criteria that will be used to assess if a certification scheme can be recognized under the Act. And later on, after an impact assessment will be done, we are also going to look at the environmental footprint of certain critical raw materials that are placed on the EU market. So the environmental footprint will assess so both the raw materials from the EU, but also from the third countries. And then, of course, there are certain measures that will be done to update or revise certain waste legislation that exists already in order to incorporate aspects related to critical raw materials, like the WEEE directive, or the end-of-life vehicles directive. And this is my last slide, showing basically that we also put forward a governance structure.
We can't see the last slide. Can you please switch to the last slide? Because we are still at slide number 7.
This one. You see the governance?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now
okay. So,
thank you.
Okay. So the governance system, the governance system, we are going to establish a board that has an advisory role for the Commission, and the board will be comprised by the member states, will be chaired by the Commission and the European Parliament as observer, and the board will have the role at looking at different aspects that I already mentioned within certain subgroups. So, for example, there will be a subgroup looking at strategic projects and assessing based on a recommendation from the Commission and taking a decision and submitting an opinion to the Commission about if a project can be nominated as strategic project. There will be another subgroup on monitoring, on stress tests and early warning mechanisms. And another subgroup will look at strategic partnerships. And here I'm linking again with the external dimension of the Act, because as I said from the beginning, the Act has these two main focuses, domestic, but also how to continue fostering strategic partnerships so that we make sure that we have a diversified supply of critical raw materials. Here, when it comes to strategic partnerships, we have been very active over the last years in developing strategic partnerships on raw materials value chain with different countries. We have signed in 2021 with Canada and Ukraine, in 2022 with Kazakhstan and Namibia. In this year, actually, we are very successful in signing with Argentina and Chile in June and July this year. And only last week or 2 weeks ago, during the Global Gateway Forum, we have signed with the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. And we have other discussions ongoing with Australia, with Greenland that is very close to be signed, and Norway to develop future partnerships. So we make sure that we develop partnerships with like-minded countries, but also with resource-rich countries. And these partnerships are not only to help the EU and deliver the supplies that we need, but also to help them locally to develop value chains. So we call them win-win partnerships, because together and with the help of Global Gateway Facility, we actually provide funding to help the countries develop along the value chain locally. So we bring local beneficiation and support in terms of infrastructure development, roads, energy, digital infrastructure, but also skills, capacity building, training, regulatory support, and so on. And also a very important element, research and innovation.
Thank you very much for this.
This is what I wanted to say. These are a few slides, thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much for the extensive presentation that you have offered us on the Critical Raw Material Act. And now, in order to close the cycle, but also to have this overview of what we have discussed so far, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Constantin Ciupercea, Professor, former Head of Land Resources and Supply Chain Assessments Unit at the Joint Research Center in the European Commission. His most recent areas of research and policy support were focused on raw materials, policy support and monitoring indicators, coordinating the management of the Commission's raw materials information system, soil and land use policies and research, providing evidence support, assessment and management of knowledge for soil contamination, desertification and monitoring indicators, and linkages to the Common Agriculture Policy, the Sustainable Development Goals, and climate change. During his intervention, he will touch upon the EU traditional values and strengths, empowering sustainable consumption, circular economy, and strategic autonomy. And I kindly invite him to, given his long expertise in this field, to also offer us an overview, a critical overview of what was presented so far. Mr. Ciupagia, you have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you. I will try to share the screen. Hopefully you will be able to see it soon. Do you see it?
Yes, it's working. If you can speak a bit louder so we can hear you better.
I will also try to speak louder. Is it okay
Thank
now?
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this invitation to an excellent discussion until now. And definitely I will try to think of this presentation in terms of also wrapping up something. But I have to say I don't have to do too much because my predecessors in the presentations made everything very clear. They touched the main points. So for me, practically, it's oops, sorry. It is easier than to try to do this wrap-up presentation and overview in the very few minutes that are left. The main speaking points are listed here. I will very briefly touch on the first points because they were made very clear by the presentation of His Excellency, our ambassador in the Kingdom of Spain, by the Spanish ministerial representative, by the speakers from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and from the government. Practically speaking about EU priorities and Spanish presidency, Spanish EU presidency priorities will be very brief. Then I will try to make a kind of synthesis on EU strengths and EU's opportunities in the current situation. And last but not least, focus a little bit on the concept of circular economy for Europe, which I think it is related to all the big priorities of the moment for Europe. And having said that, I am going here with my presentation, and this means that I am referring to 3 of the 6 priorities of the current Commission. The Green Deal for Europe, the Europe Fit for the Digital Age, and the Stronger Europe in the World, because they are the ones that come out vividly and came out also in the discussions that we had today. But I will definitely not forget also the stress put by the current Commission on and by the EU on the strengthening of the internal market, which was also mentioned by several speakers vividly, and the need of looking at people, at citizens of Europe, to the cultural dimension, to the social dimension, to the fairness and justice dimension as well. So these are the priorities of the moment, let's say. But on top of those priorities, I have to say that came, came the global challenges that hit the planet and definitely impacted on Europe, society, economy, and everything. And I'm talking here about the post-pandemic attempt to recover. The Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they were mentioned by the speakers. The recent conflict in Middle East, it was not mentioned, but it is very important and it says a lot about the same topics that we are discussing. And definitely, I want to refer also to this comeback of let's say independent views and of protectionism and so on. However, also have to say that the priorities that the Spanish EU presidency put, and they were very clear mentioned, are clearly addressing all the main challenges. And I will not insist on that because they were so very well explained by the first speakers, especially in of today. So let's talk about strengths and opportunities. Here we have. I tried to list just to make you more nervous, yeah, and and to put you in a debate mood. Some of what I, and not only I, but looking at many publications and documents, considered to be EU strengths. I listed here some of them. Of course, there may be different views from many other people and EU citizens. However, we can talk about definitely about EU being the largest trader in the world, and that was mentioned clearly today. The largest food manufacturers, yeah, and this is a very important component because I will try to focus more on consumption side this time. We have very equilibrated and mature consumption patterns to which other competitors on the global market are looking, and they are trying to reach the same levels. And this is also very important because we look today at China or we look to India or to developing countries without thinking that maybe in 20, 30 years from now on, they will be much closer to our consumption pattern and have a different understanding of the processes which we would like to see today happening. Yeah, but this is a slow process of adjustment and of development. So I know that I may appear a little bit arrogant by saying that as a European, but this is the truth. In consumption, the level once reached doesn't go back on the same path. Yeah, this is the so-called hysteresis of consumption. So once you reach a level, it will be very difficult to go back on the same path and making the same type of adjustment. Then, yes, raw material recyclability actions. We are much further in this process than other regions of the world. We are leader in selected renewable energy technologies in the automotive industry and high-tech base metal products manufacturing. And here I want to point out at one thing. Remember, 65 years ago, yeah, why was EU built? We don't have to give up on those values because those are European Union values. We were built around steel, we were built around materials, raw materials, base raw materials, and they continue to be important. Of course, we are reindustrializing, we are reconceptualizing, we have different consumption pattern, we have to look at environment, but let's not forget our history and what brought us together. And we are still top region in innovation and R&D investment, not as much as we would like to be, but important steps are on their way. And about the opportunities, I have I also listed some. We are leaders in promoting food security at world level. We are discussing a lot about open strategic autonomy, and this is very important because we want to keep our openness. This was mentioned by my predecessors today. We are a leading force in driving to nature restoration and biodiversity restoration. We are promoting the circular economy, and I will come in my last slides to this. And when we look at the way in which we are producing and exporting, we are very good in finding niches for exchanging products that have a very inelastic price elasticity then on the global markets, which is a virtue, if you think of. Yeah. So there are opportunities, and the biggest one is related to cohesion policy and our geography. And somehow nobody dares to point out at the importance of looking at Europe like a center with many poles, yeah, in which there is a need of strengthening the periphery, and the Balkans and the Balkan policy of the EU is a very good example. After we tried to destroy the unity in the beginning of 90s, now we are trying to come back and to bring Balkans totally into the EU. And we have our enlargement policy, but we also have to think very clearly how to use our strengths in resources. I'm referring still to water, although this is depleting in terms of a huge reuse and use of water resources, but we are still a continent rich in water, and try to use this way for future transport corridors that will link the extreme poles of Europe. This is something to think about in the open strategic autonomy discussion for the future. If we want to increase our internal market and to increase the unity of Europe, we have still to do a lot on this aspect. So I promised to focus a little bit more on the circular economy concept, because I think here lies the future big opportunities for Europe. Maybe it will be very difficult to diminish the gaps that we have already with our main competitors in many industries areas, such as digitalization, such as production or extraction of critical raw materials, because we talked about them, and so on. It is important to increase our own endowment and possibilities, but it is also important to think on how to reuse and to keep the raw materials and the products as long as possible in our economy. Because this is the main thing of the circular economy. This is the main advantage. If you can do it and you do it properly, then you don't use so many raw materials from the start, then you are not so dependent on others from the start. And moreover, if you learn how to consume in a virtuous way, then you may be insulated for future shocks on this territory. Because at the end of the day, despite the fact that the circular economy action plans in 2015, in 2020, everything that was generated around that didn't refer directly to all raw materials, but they touched only bits and pieces. The big elephant in the room is raw materials and the products that are intensively based on them. This is the economy, because the economy at the end of the day is the science of managing scarce resources. And I think this says everything. I listed here the priorities that were in the Circular Economy Action Plan 2015. I listed the priorities of the new Circular Economy Action Plan in 2020. By the way, it's a pity to see that from 2015 to 2020, the word raw materials is appearing less and less in the main document. It is absolutely true that all the new developments of the Commission, and I think the last years, and especially this year, developments of the Commission are clearly showing that the interest has not been lost, yeah? But it's a pity to see that at high top level, there is still a kind of fear of mentioning raw material as one of the most important aspects. And I'm not talking only about minerals, metals, critical raw materials. I'm talking mainly about food resources as well, because the whole, not the whole, half of the motivation of Russia's invasion on Ukraine is related to how to destroy the agricultural potential of that country, because this is what the war does, and this is a tool of control. And the recent conflict, actually, in the Middle East is offering another example, maybe related to gas and oil, because we know that on those territories, yeah, on the current Israel, there are resources there. So it's another very interesting view. Nobody talks about it because we see only the other surface of the iceberg, but the real story behind it's raw materials. And my last thing is on the importance of consumption. I will be very brief because I already surpassed my time on this, and probably your nerves are tensed around lunchtime. I want to make a very important reference to an attempt, a very successful attempt that the Ministerio de Consumo de España, so the Ministry of Consumer Affairs in Spain, did last year when they actually started a collaboration with the Commission, with the Joint Research Center of the Commission, to do a very thorough study of sustainability of consumption in Spain. And this was based on the concept of environmental footprints, mainly consumers' consumption footprints and domestic footprints. I really invite you to look into this excellent study produced by the Spanish ministry, because it shows the place of Spain vis-a-vis 16 indicators of environmental impact, the place in Europe based on the domestic footprint, but it also shows the various importance of the 16 impacts in the basket of the average Spanish consumer. And have to say, for Spain especially, the results are very clearly backed up by the reality that was obvious in the last years. It's a huge increase of the use of water generated by their attempts to have more agricultural exports, which are very successful. And at the end of the day, it's the decision of the policymakers to see, was it worse? Is it worse to continue on this line? Are we really destroying a lot the environment or not? Of course, in a year with drought like it was this year, the depletion of water in the lakes of Spain up to 10% of their normal level would be a huge alarm signal, but maybe in a normal year with more rain would not be as such. So it's an excellent tool, this life cycle assessment, to be provided to policymakers in order to first analyze and then take decisions. So this slide, which was offered kindly to me by the former colleagues in JRC, is showing the last 30 years of life cycle assessment in Europe. They are very important. Madalina made clear references to many aspects of alignment to environmental aspects and policies of the Critical Raw Material Act during her presentation. This is somehow suggested to be done also using environmental footprints. What I want to say is, despite being extremely, extremely difficult to be realized, the main proof that this type of analysis from the environmental point of view is very important and solid is if you enter any social network, LinkedIn and so on, you will see how many very aggressive reactions coming from lobbying groups are against this type of analysis. And if you read more carefully and look at who is behind those lobbying groups, you will understand that maybe this analysis is really one of the future tools in analyzing and addressing. My recommendation, and I insisted on that, is that the member states that really want to do more and something on looking at their alignment of all the policies with the Green Deal goals, so in order to do the green transition, should look more at this type of analysis and put some money in education and training on this. And it was my goal to mention last the education part, because I think here is the key for the future. We have to think of long-term policies. I have spoken a lot. Sorry for taking so much of your time, and thank you also for listening.
Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation and for offering us some food for thought regarding the European Union's strengths and opportunities in the context of these transitions. Esteemed participants, with your permission, I would like to kindly ask you to remain with us in the following 6-7 minutes so that we can address some of the questions that have been written in the registration form. The first one of it is related to the federalization of the European Union. Can we see the open strategic autonomy as a concise step towards the federalization of the European Union? And I invite one of the speakers from this panel to address this question. Maybe Mr. Puente, if you would like.
Yes, I can answer. Well, there is a topic from many years ago what is really the future of the European Union. Either a union, a federal union, or a union of national states. So we have both opinions in current member state government. So it's a very difficult question. And if governments doesn't want to answer, for me, it will be very difficult to do it as well. But what I can say, and I can tell you what is the opinion. Well, this is nothing to do with the reindustrialization of the European Union. Well, a federal organization or a federal group of countries like, for instance, the United States. Well, I can mention, I don't know if somebody of my colleagues have already mentioned what was the proposal of Mr. Biden. Mr. Biden suggested really something that can be very interesting also for the European Union, and is the American government consider that the transition into green industrialization will affect to the social body of the European Union. So it doesn't mean that we have, if we are a federal, we have a federal government, will have the same consequences of the policy of Mr. Biden in the United States, and it's the same. It's the same. If we are still a national organization. When a member state joined the European Union, accept to give some a part of sovereignty. It doesn't provide to the European Union, to Brussels, the whole sovereignty of the country. So there are some sectors, some parcels that still remain on the hands of the national government. So I can see that there is not any difference between a federalism point of view and what is presently we are currently living. If you are familiar with the situation in the United States, every state in the United States, California or Texas or Idaho, they have their own policy. So, and the government is a federal government, but the federal government is dealing with very specific topics, not about the energy policy. But in this case, the suggestion from Biden policy is really to what is considered the inflation. Well, I think he called something like that. I have in my papers. Well, I have something.
The U.S. Inflation Act. Well, thank you very much for the perspective provided for this answer. Another question that was shared by our participants registered to this debate was focused on the Romanian companies, as they need to be active players in this transition, and they are expected to pay different costs in order to make their businesses more aligned with the climate objectives. Eugenia, I would address this question to you. Are the Romanian companies ready to be active players in this transition, or are they facing some shortcomings?
I will try to be short in my answer. I would say that there is a big difference in the difficulties to engage and to go through this energy transition, and the differences given by the size of the companies. It's one thing if you talk about a big corporation, public or private. which has other resources, an army of people, consultants that it can mobilize in order, to write applications, submit applications, attract the necessary funding to invest in this cleaner future. And it's an entirely different story if you talk about a small and medium enterprise, because oftentimes, and most of the time, these are entities that require more help, more support from the government agencies, from the, let's say, public authorities that deal with the distribution of EU money and organize the call. So these are the entities that need to be supported and that require more support, sometimes encouragement in order to apply, because they find it extremely difficult to, to engage in this whole, sometimes not easy process of accessing EU funding. Even if this funding is available, sometimes all the things that you need to go through in order to access it acts as a deterrent for the small and medium enterprises, which are companies that are smaller. They have maybe 10, 12, 50, up to 50 employees. So size matters when we're talking about the difficulties and the easiness with which you can access the funding, and the, let's say, how easy you will go through this energy transition process, how fast you can invest in what is necessary in the new technology, in digitalization, in cleaner energy, and so on and so forth. And I think for this segment, the smaller guys, we at the European level, but also at the specifically Romanian small and medium enterprises, need to be helped more.
Thank you very much for the perspective shared. And I also see Mrs. Cosmina Miu, who would like to add a few points on this question. If you would like to open your mic and just for 1 minute as we are closing our debate to share your perspective. Mrs. Miu. Or if you would like to leave the answer in the chat, we can also follow it right there, because we cannot hear you right now. Okay, so I will kindly ask you to leave your answer in the chat to this question. And one last question that has been addressed by our participants is focused on the security situation in the Middle East. And what's going to be the European Union's approach and management of this crisis, and also in addition to what you have previously presented on our regulations on the critical raw materials and the specificities that have been mentioned in the energy sector, I would like to ask you how do you see this situation being unfolded in the future? So maybe if Mrs. Ivanica or Mr. Ciupagia would like to address this question, how the situation in the Middle East is going to affect what we are currently doing in the European level in terms of our climate objectives and the regulations on critical raw materials and so on.
I can start. Thank you for the question. Well, I think that any conflict that is happening, and we started with Ukraine and now in Middle East, shows that we need to be stronger internally, that we need to have our own domestic capacities to be able to manage this, to have our resilience and sustainable supply of raw materials that will let us proceed on our ambitious goals. This also showed that we need to reduce our strategic dependencies, so that we do not rely on external partners, on single suppliers or single points of failure, as we call them. So we just need to be stronger internally and to make sure that we have a European policy, industrial policy that protects our industries, and make sure that we stay strong and competitive on the international stage. And I would like maybe Constantin to complement on that.
Yeah, I thank you, Maria, thank you, Lisa. Yes, I would like to add, there is, I'm stressing again, there is a need of strengthening the internal market and the four freedoms. This is extremely important, and this translates into increasing our strategic ability to defend ourselves. And what I like enormously in the presentation of Madalina was the reference to the Greenland Treaty. So after seeing Greenland leaving EU in '83, it's so good to know that they are coming back somehow alongside EU. It was refreshing to hear the focus on the relationship with Latin America that were mentioned also and were priority of the Spanish presidency, but also of the Commission since many years ago. But I also want to add, give practically some counter example that I saw were not lessons learned, and I see them repeated. When COVID came, what did the member states? Speaking about federalization, they closed their border, they closed any Schengen previous agreement, and close internally, like they would have been insulated from COVID by doing that. We saw it was not the case. What is now happening with this terrorism increased risk? The same thing. We are closing some of the countries, they close the Schengen borders and so on. Why? Is this really the idea of EU? Does it help? No, it doesn't. What did we do with the vaccines of COVID? Each government took its own strategy in doing provision, instead of doing a unique European strategy from the beginning. Did it help? No. Some countries were left with huge stocks, and some didn't have enough from the very beginning. So I'm just giving these two examples, not to be followed in the future, maybe. Yeah. So thanks.
Thank you very much for the answers provided. As we have reached the end of our debate, I would like to thank to all the guest speakers from this panel for their insightful presentations, and hopefully they will agree to also share these presentations in the event page that we have prepared on our website. Together with our colleagues from the communication unit, my colleagues from the studies unit are working to also prepare an event summary of what has been discussed during this meeting. So the conclusions are going to be available online. Thank you very much for the participants, for your patience to attend this event 22 minutes after the original hour that was presented. And for the end of the debate, I would like to invite our Director General for the final remarks.
Thank you, Elisa. Also, thank you for your contribution and for facilitating the dialogue and the discussions. It was a very productive meeting, I think, with lots of concrete and updated information, questions and well-timed answers. And I think the topic we tackled today leaves room for future subjects to be further addressed. I would also like to thank all the speakers today for their contributions and excellent remarks, and to the participants. And I do look forward to our future events on important EU topics. Special thanks to my colleagues, Florentina and Georgiana from the communication unit, for their support in organizing this debate, as well as to our colleagues at the Embassy in Spain. And we do look forward to seeing you again in our future conferences. The next event in this series will be organized next year in spring in partnership with the Romanian Embassy in Belgium. So we look forward to seeing you then. But until then, we will organize in December our annual conference. So hopefully we'll see you also at that conference. All the best to you.
Thank you.
All the best. See you soon. Bye.